Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very inspiring show coming right up with special guest Keith Gregory, and he's here today to share with us not only his book, but also his process, Awakening the Sacred Masculine at the Turn of the Ages. Now, Keith is an author, energy artist, soul coach, advanced energy healer, and originator of the initiatory journey to awaken your sacred masculine. Now, Keith learned to do this work through his own self-healing journey and by addressing and transforming the considerable woundology of the past. As a clairvoyant and medical intuitive, Keith was born highly empathic. Having studied and practiced a wide array of alternative healing and consciousness growth modalities for over 35 years, he developed an innate, intuitive, and healing ability to assist those he works with. So let's welcome to the show, Keith Gregory.
Thank you, Marianne.
What a joy it is to have you here and to talk about waking the sacred masculine. I mean, we've been connected on Facebook for some time. I saw this come through and said, gosh, I need to talk to you about this.
You're so smart. You're so wise. So tuned in. Good for you.
Well, I guess flattery will just get you everywhere, right? But hey, I'm glad we're spending this time talking about this because I was really curious about what this journey is about and what's inspired you to be on this path.
Suffering. I found that I couldn't change my life with the tools that I had. And especially through my personality, I kept hitting a ceiling, even though I had been meditating since I was 13 and on the spiritual quest. I believe that the universe forces us to our destiny. And for whatever reason, I contracted in this life and it's always a choice. It's always user participation effective in that I didn't have to follow a spiritual path. I didn't have to go into healing work instead of a well-paying job or that. But it feels like my karmic, dharmic pathway was to, dare I say, come home in this life. And I think that's the potential for everybody on the planet, in that I believe we're amidst the turning of the ages. We're in not a final end game, and you can see it playing out politically, economically, socially, culturally. So we're coming to a point where either we evolve or we become extinct, and that's perhaps a little black and white dire in its consequences. But I feel that for me, so backstory: I had been living in Asheville, which is near where you are in North Carolina, and had gone to a healing school in Sedona in '96. And Sedona, as you know, is a melting pot, a new age mecca, or had been. And one of the experiences I was invited into was an adjunct of a woman that had been designed a 9-month gestation process called Awakening the Priestess process, Awakening the Sacred Feminine. And she had been doing these circles in southern Arizona for 8 or 9, 10 years with women exclusively. Had come to Sedona in '96, and I had been invited in to a look-see meeting with her and a number of other men to join into this initiatory awakening, the priest process. And I jumped into it. It sounded like a great idea, spiritual bling, with fun. And it ended up just kicking my butt, because what it introduced me to was shadow work. And interestingly and ironically enough, almost to a one, all of my spiritual teachers have been strong, conscious women. And the irony and the paradox is that it was through conscious women that I learned about my sacred masculinity. So that's what brings me to this. Thank you.
Well, thank you for sharing that with us. And I think it's important when we look at both the sacred feminine and the sacred masculine, there is, at this point in time, there does seem to be a greater awareness of the sacred feminine. And I think more people are interested in the sacred masculine. And so that's why I was so intrigued by your work.
Well, sacred masculine and sacred feminine is not gender specific. we carry both anima and animus from the Jungian terminology. And again, the feminine has been riding the wave, is the wave. Not women specifically, but the sacred feminine has been flooding onto the planet. You as a woman know. You live a life that your mother or grandmother couldn't possibly conceive of. Not in terms of technological advantages, i.e. speaking over internet, but having the autonomy, the sovereignty that created most profoundly pioneers women have been to quest for your own personal power, and have been doing so for a number of decades. And was very fortunate in Sedona as well as in Asheville to be in goddess quote unquote communities. Even though I'm hetero to the core, there was a real affinity for the consciousness and the pioneering efforts to develop their personal power. And men are really slow in the uptake, relatively speaking. We're slow picking it up, but we're starting to get more interest, is starting to get more traction, the sacred masculine. And interestingly enough, when I wrote my book, I was sharing the title with an old friend of mine, and she said, Keith, those three, awakening, sacred, masculine, don't belong in the same sentence. I mean, there's an oxymoronic. Sacred, masculine, awakening? She couldn't get it. Because it hadn't, this was 25 years ago when I first started speaking these words and thinking about my book. So we're in an evolutionary arc that is so profound, and men are finally, I believe, hopefully, awakening to this themselves.
And for our listeners that are tuning in and listening, the beautiful birds behind you, you're actually joining us today from Kauai. You know, some of my favorite parts of the world. So it's so nice that we get to spend this time with you talking about this. When we look at the sacred masculine, you said it's kind of like the yin yang with the sacred feminine. So when someone's diving into the sacred masculine, what can they expect to work on? What are we looking at?
Well, one of the prerequisites is that you learn to feel your emotions as a man. And the bottom line is you can't heal it unless you feel it. And you can't heal it unless you embrace it in the heart space. And that's core primary to my work in my life, is the heart space consciousness, where all things become one. All differences can potentially dissolve in the heart space. So for men, it's about feeling our emotions, which we have absolutely no practice or training in as a rule. And that's not to denigrate men or my primary caregiver, my dad. Just wasn't trained. He didn't have and he was a PhD Harvard psychologist who didn't know how to feel. He hadn't been really educated to do so. So the thing I've learned, and it's been an arduous, often solitary path these past 25 years, in that a man has to take ownership and responsibility for our feelings, our emotions, our thoughts, absolutely our actions. Until we do that, there'll always be a denial of our basic core self, which is an emotional content. To do so, thank you for listening, we have to empower our feminine nature. Not effeminate, but feeling, intuition, receptivity, nurturance, and an ability to rest in not knowing, to rest in the void, I found is essential in awakening my sacred masculine.
I know in your book you talk about, the core beliefs. Is that what you're kind of alluding to here when we talk about, feeling these emotions? Because you're right, men have not been taught or even allowed in many ways to feel feelings. And if they do have them, like, what do they do with them next,
Well, that's the misnomer, and it is actually true, is that we have warehouses of unfelt, unprocessed unresolved emotion. And this is lending itself into reincarnation and past lives. And as souls, as you know, as spirits having a human experience, not humans having a spiritual one, is that we've played on both sides of the gender fence through our evolutionary um, experiences on this planet as a soul. However, in many respects, and this is true for all humans, especially in childhood, if you have a disturbing or difficult experience that you can't integrate psychologically as a small child, you have to splinter it off. You have to push it behind you. You have to stuff it in what's called your shadow. You can't deal with it. You don't have the tools or the wherewithal to meet much of the, well, we all had parents, and it wasn't easy. So men have this warehouse residual of unfelt emotion that is really, really overwhelming for us. Because once you crack that door, it's as if a tsunami blows through your field, but you can't come home unless you attend to your shadow land, the stuffed stuff, emotionally speaking. And again, as you say, men have not been trained to do that effectively. So that's really first and foremost. And it takes guidance. It takes hopefully a role model that a man relates to, that can be a way shower of sorts. And it's not an information download. It's a man having done a significant body of their own healing work to create a transformation, or rather a transmission that gives another man permission or a sense of trust and faith that he can do that himself. Feel and resolve feeling, transform feeling.
Do you think that's part of the issue, is that when men feel like if I open the door and the tsunami comes in, how am I going to control or master it if my
Absolutely.
feelings are running amok?
Absolutely. And without the tools. And I'm a real advocate for tools of consciousness. I love practical steps that are go-to ways to resolve and move through difficulties in life. And there is a way to effectively transform emotion, and it has to do with the heart space. I found the heart space is the only place that I can bring resolution or equanimity to the, dare I say, the vicissitudes and trauma and challenges of life. It's through the heart space.
So when people start this work, when men start this work, what are some of the things we talked that they're actually going to be dealing with the shadow aspect? What are some other things that they're going to experience and walk through as they're doing this journey?
It's the core belief systems, or the self unworth. We all have a package that we bring into this life that I believe in this life especially we have an opportunity to transcend or transform or heal. And it's all these misbeliefs that we're not good enough, um, and that's, I think one of the core, speaking of the male, female dance, I think one of the core fears of women are self-image issues. And for men, it's, am I strong enough? Am I capable enough? There's a strength component for men that I think we're fighting up against. I think there's a core belief that we're not strong enough, we're not capable enough. And we have to basically heal all the misbeliefs as well as stuffed emotions to change our belief system. And it's gut level work. It's not Tinkerbell wand hitting in the head and poof, you're clear or awake or resolved. It's doing your spiritual healing work in the nuts and bolts of the wheelhouse of our belief and misbeliefs about being men, and have to evolve as well.
So in your book, you talk about belly wisdom. What is that, and why is that important on our journey?
Well, that's really a reflection of the feminine awareness. It's not the mind, it's not the intellect. It's our gut core, almost primal relationship to life. And whether it's tapping into what some have termed 90s psychobabble. It's the inner child. It's those deep, deep core emotions that have to be attended to and embraced. Healing comes on its own. And as a woman, I imagine you're in a relationship or have been. You have an argument with your partner and you work it out and you come to resolution and all is well. But at the end of the day, feeling held and embraced, and that sense of safety and that sense of being loved, really, is what does the healing, is what does the transformation. And our belly wisdom has an innate knowing of what that feels like. And until a man accesses that, we're lost in our heads in a very crass way of saying we're stuck in our heads. And that's not an integrated, not only a whole body, but a whole self component. A man has to embrace his feminine nature. A woman has to embrace her masculine nature to be whole, however you term that or reference that. Thank you.
You talk about being able to trace those ancestral and cultural and gender themes that seem to color our perspectives and our awareness in life. What are some of those themes that would come up in a person's life that they need to take a look at?
It's the hereditary familial cultural patterns that have been ingrained in a familial line. And one of the underbelly of quote unquote our separation issues is fear, is disconnect from source, disconnect from our own source self. But I grew up in a family that, like most typical families, just to simply say, we love as an adult as we were loved as children. And like water, abuse flows downstream, flows down the familial line, as does joy, as does consciousness. So to look and see what our parents were about, what our culture is about, what our color skin is about, what our gender is about, to re-reference what our soul is about, takes first identifying some of these themes from our parents and then choosing to transform them again through the heart space. Does that answer your question? Kinda.
Yeah, it sure did. And I appreciate you going through that. So when let's say we have gentlemen that are listening to this interview and our discussion here, what would be some of the key things that would identify whether or not they need to start this type of work?
Are you happy? Are you content? Are you really in love with your life and in love with yourself? And even though that sounds a little narcissistic, are you in gratitude? Do you feel, again, this is lending to more spiritual terminology, but are you free? Do you feel on purpose? And that is an essential quality for the masculine, is that there is absolutely a necessity to serve a purpose higher than the fulfillment of our own individual wants, desires, and wishes and needs. It's maybe not a highfalutin quest for the Holy Grail or such, but we have to serve the tribe. It gives us a sense of fulfillment. Unless a man does that, and we see that every day, and I can personally relate, a man becomes despondent, depressed, angry, addictive. So, it's core essential. You're living a life, or living the way you want to live. And if you're not, you need to look at the things that are getting in the way. And of course, that's true for men and women. Thank you.
You also talk about living ceremony. What is that and why would we do it?
My golly, again, coming from women, so smart, so intelligent, so wise. It's treating life as a gift, and it's employing and incorporating not the systems, but spirit, nature, the life force of the earth. It's being masterful in co-creating with the forces of life, of nature. It's very similar to cooking a meal. It's really good to have the ingredients laid out. It's good to have a sense of how to do this process of putting a meal together. There's a beginning, there's a middle, there's an end. There's a very, not structured, but there's a design to creating power or movement with a core intention. And again, to my priestess mentor, her name was Nicole Christine. Very, very powerful, lovely woman. She's since passed. We had the same birthday. She was 17 years older. She said, living ceremony will give you an ability to work consciously with life and life force. And she said and taught, intention is paramount. What do you want? What are you trying to bring into fruition or bring into creation? It's good to have a true north in the sense of what you want to create in this container. Also, invocation. Whatever you pray to, whatever you align with, angels, guides, masters, Jesus, Mary, your great grandmother, whatever. As long as it serves your highest and greatest good, excuse me, and the highest and greatest good for all concerned, it creates a vessel and a chalice of power or of intentionality, living ceremony. And it's just a way of incorporating and accessing the conscious relationship with, for instance, the elementals, the elements, water, fire, earth, air, and ether. He's calling in this spiritual help that's available to us that for the most part, unless we're in deep crisis, requires, and this is the free will clause, that we ask, that we invite in support and help to help our lives, to help us live our lives more effectively and more joyfully and hopefully prosperously. Thank you.
You know, I know you, not only in your book, but the work you do, talk about effective ways to transform what no longer serves us so we can really reach our highest potential and our greatest good. And in your book, you seem to provide kind of a roadmap for people to be able to do that. What are some things that keep people stuck that you see? Because I know you work with people individually and in groups and do speaking events. What are some of the common things that you see that keep people stuck?
Well, simply put, life only lives now. Spirit is only alive in the present moment. If we're not present in the present moment, we're not really showing up to make a conscious change or shift. In that, the only point of personal power to consciously, proactively change or create change, positive change, is in the present moment. So unless you're present, which means out of the brain, not denigrating the head at all, thus the heart space. As we breathe, our body takes place in the present moment only. We only live now. It brings us into the present moment in a very, very effective, very visceral, very simple way. Since the moment we squirted out of our moms, hopefully, our heart's been beating nonstop and we've been breathing nonstop. And arguably, the breath and focusing on the breath is the oldest meditation technique because it always brings us to the moment. And unless we're present, we're less effective in creating positive change in our lives.
So when people start to do this sacred masculine work, what are some of the things that they can see happen initially? Because I know we've gone through some of the things that keep them back. You know, how will life be for them as issues and problems come up? Because those come up regardless what's happening in our path.
You know, it's so profound and so simple, and it is hard work. And having gone through an Alcoholics Anonymous program, you have to be willing to do the work. And even though, say, you stop drinking or drugging, and I'm not advocating either way, your problems are still there. But it gives you a clarity, hopefully, to meet them and proactively deal with them. When we're not blocking ourselves, when we're not running this destructive belief systems or patterns, I'm not good enough, life isn't safe, love sucks, or whatever, when those have been transformed, then it's much, much, much easier to meet the moment conscientiously and consciously, and dare I say, be available to the spiritual help that is always present. And I'm a grounded guy. I'm not woo-woo, tutti-frutti. Though I lived in Sedona, I believe in practical steps. And I've learned, the stuff doesn't go away just because you don't want to see it. The bill has to get paid. And if you don't pay it, the repercussions and adverse residual effects. So the idea is to clear the decks so that we're not blocking or interfering or pushing away our abilities to meet life conscientiously and to be effective and hopefully, there's our chickens, co-creating a life that's magnificent or wondrous or comfortable or joyful. That's really the bottom line. Is you got to do your work. You got to face the funk in yourself to be clear of it. Bottom line.
And the rooster is agreeing with you on that.
And we can send these to you. They're all over. I'll put them in a bag and put them right there in the plane in your neighborhood, and you'll piss everybody off because these guys just go off 2 a.m. They don't even know the sun's supposed to be up first. That's one of the.
I don't know if you can actually have them all eliminated from your neighborhood, but a good try.
Yeah. You really can. I think they're protected because they're native birds or they're indigenous to Hawaii. Some of these bodacious roosters. My golly.
Well, they are, it's interesting. A lot of it could be like, an analogy for a wake up reminder. It's like, gosh, it's time to start looking at, when we look at the sacred masculine, time to start looking at its own awakening. And I think the rooster kind of is a great analogy for people to wake up and look at this.
There we go. And for the masculine, the core wound is misuse and abuse of power and misuse and abuse of will. And women certainly have traditionally been on the bottom end of the stick. And, not to denigrate men, but I think the world is in the condition it's in is because those in power have misused it for their own ends. Greed is a killer. And whether it's an economic or a ecological or political, we're seeing sexual, what have you, we're seeing the effects of the misuse of power. This # Me Too, Epstein, all the horrific misuses of will sexually. That's kind of how we got here. And I'm not saying if women were in power, everything would be hunky-dory, because this is an archetypal consciousness, the masculine, the feminine, which we all carry. Again, not gender specific. And just as an aside, and I'm not politically driven, but the blessing of having who we have in the White House is that he's forcing us all to choose our values, what we believe in, what we stand for, what our core principles are. And that's really, really important. In fact, it's necessary to know what you're about, know what you stand for, know what your values are. It's essential. You can't move forward unless you see the pieces within yourself that are affecting your life. And most people live from their unconscious decisions instead of their conscious decision base. And to be aware, to be awake, to be present, to be aligned with our higher self or our spiritual wisdom and grounded into the earth beneath us. I work a lot with what's called our verticality, our vertical power current and the soul stream. I'm speaking energy esoteric here. We have 7 chakras within our etheric field that extend up and extend down. And as we create that north-south verticality, it creates an in the world but not of the world consciousness that allows us to be fed by our spiritual wisdom and knowledge, as well as grounded into the earth beneath us, that I find is essential and paramount to make it through the challenges of life, let alone the profundity of what's happening on the planet now. It just creates an equanimity that for me is a better way to live than riding like a cork on a wave and being in that reactive mode.
Mm-hmm.
That
Without a doubt.
I have lived in most of my life. Thank you.
So, Keith, where can our listeners connect with you and learn more, not only about your book, but about the work that you do?
I have a website called awakenyoursacred.com, the initiatory journey to awaken your sacred masculine for men and women. I have a Facebook profile. I've been writing and blogging on Facebook for 7 or 8 years. Keith Gregory, Awakening the Sacred Masculine. And I do a post every week, and I do a video live every Sunday. And just as an sidebar, I was living in New York City. I've been living in Europe for a number of years and was invited back to the States to work, to do my healing work, and ended up in New York. And I was just simply desperate for connection, for community. And I realized in order to join the conversation, I had to start the conversation. I had to start writing and reaching out. Instead of waiting for it to catch me and get me, people connecting with me, I had to step out and obviously offer what I do. So I started plugging away and writing. And interestingly enough, when I first started, I must have not correctly set the settings appropriate to get feedback. So for the first 3 or 4 months, I didn't get anything in response to my work. And I had to ask myself, God, am I writing to be recognized? Am I writing to be famous? Am I writing to be validated? Or am I writing because it has to come through me? I have to write this. And many artists or people with passion, they do what they do because they have no choice. And I do what I do because this is the only thing that works for me, that makes sense. So I started writing. And so anyway, so on Facebook, I have blogs that I put out that are specific about my experience. And I think that's essential. It's not just high flying, woo woo, talking with archangels or Christ. It's some of the step-by-step bump and grind that a man will encounter to come home or to awaken or to open his heart. That I think I take this as a very, very serious role of simply testifying or being accountable to this process. For me, it has not been easy. It's been worth it every day. So thank you. In the book, Awakening the Sacred Masculine at the Turning of the Ages, again, it's through Balboa Press. There's another couple of books that are in the works. Thank you.
Well, Keith, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
You are really a good interview. You seem like you must be a nice person. You must have a lot of friends who love you, animals too. You seem like a really sweet person, Marianne. I've been watching your interviews and feeling your vibe. And I just thank you for giving me the time to talk and share with you today.
Oh my goodness, Keith, thank you so much. It's such an honor to spend this time with you. And of course, to talk about not only your book, Awakening the Sacred Masculine, but also your process that you do, which I feel is highly powerful. Awakening the Sacred Masculine is available as a Kindle book on Amazon, and it's a great read. I highly suggest it. Again, if you're looking to connect with Keith Gregory, you can at awakenyoursacred.com for more information, not only about his book, but also about the services that he provides. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You're listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Sunday, Monday, Thursday, and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Pacific Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.